that I think the new contest is sometimes it's been described as the 21st century version of the great game in Afghanistan has shifted to the maritime domain in the Indian Ocean region. And that has now become the playground as far as India, China, US, everyone, the big powers contest is happening in the Indian Ocean region, sometimes also called as the Indo-Pacific. And that's essentially happened because post 72, when Nixon opened up to China, and that grand old bargain which was in place, which I thought was the US kind of a policy that, and US thought that it will happen exactly the way it planned it. It hasn't really panned out the way the US planned it. The policy was that time, or at least the hope was in the US or in Washington, was that China will accept US primacy, US will facilitate China's economic growth, and other benefits from US primacy and China's economic growth will follow or be given to other nations in Asia, the smaller nations. But that great Asia bargain has actually fallen apart, because it hasn't exactly panned out the way the US wanted it. China has of course become an economic powerhouse over the last 40 years, I would say, from 1978, but has in the process has also, and I don't know why the Americans were so naive, it has also become a power to reckon with militarily and politically. So therefore, that grand old bargain having fallen apart, it is also consequences for India. Because India is a neighbor with China, of course, one of the big countries in Asia, and a rising power in its own sense. But it is now confronted with a looming Chinese presence in the neighborhood. In South Asia, you want to call it SAARC, you want to call it South Asia. And that remains, and that will remain for a while, India's biggest challenge, apart from the larger Indo-Pacific construct that is now evolving. I mean, if you look at from north to south, from Nepal to Maldives, China has tried to replicate the ASEAN model of using its deep pockets to win over the ruling elite in these countries, and has succeeded to a large extent. Or it's trying to become a player even in Afghanistan, which wasn't such a clear-cut road ahead for China, but now it's with Russia. It's trying to become a player in, of course, Afghanistan, and Sri Lanka. We have seen what it has done to Sri Lanka. Got Sri Lanka trapped in a debt trap, really, and of course other smaller nations. So less said the better about Pakistan, as I keep saying it in public forums, that Pakistan is now just another province of China. And that's something that we have to be cognizant about, and that's where I think all the policy, the Pakistan's policy towards India will also be driven and have the underpinning from the Chinese itself. And it's an old idea that the Chinese have about India, limiting India to the immediate neighborhood or to South Asia. So what has been the Indian response? And that's where I think we are talking about the India, SAARC, and the creeping Chinese advance. India's response has been gradual and slow to begin with. We didn't sort of give enough attention. We took our eyes off the neighborhood itself. And of course, it is also given that India was economically not as strong as it has been for the past decade or so. So with that economic heft, I think Act East, from Look East, it's now Act East has become a reality. But I would like to see Act East to become an Engage East policy. And of course, the ASEAN outreach, which we spoke in the morning, is the beginning of, I think, resetting our ties with, I would say, the ASEAN countries, and looking eastward beyond Myanmar and Bangladesh. That's something that India is sort of trying to counterbalance or provide a counterbalance for China and China's creeping advance into South Asia. In a way, I think this term was used about a decade ago, reverse string of pearls. Is it possible? I mean, we keep talking about the Chinese string of pearls, but is it possible to have a reverse string of pearls? And maybe some elements of it are being put in place. We are getting closer to, or we have a good relationship with the Vietnamese. We are trying to help Philippines. We are going into the ASEAN region, and it's very difficult to replace China there, given the deep inroads they have made into both ASEAN and even as far as Australia. But India has begun to play the game with US, Japan, Indonesia, Australia as a kind of counterweight to China's presence. Where it will take us, there will be jostling. So basically, India is going east, China is coming west, as far as the Indian Ocean region is concerned, or the larger Asian region is concerned. And for that, you needed a government or a national security team which looked at the issues, or looked at the challenges confronting India with a much clarity than before, and there were certain elements which were dragging India down. So I call that removing the cobwebs. From day one, I think Prime Minister Modi's policy has been clear, and I think General Bhatia spoke about the neighborhood first policy being in tatters. Certainly, on the surface, we've had setbacks in Nepal, we've had setback in Maldives, and Rajapaksa coming back is something that was on the cards, given the way they were ousted, and given the way the coalition was pulling in different directions in Sri Lanka itself, because it's a marriage of convenience rather than marriage of any ideologies. So therefore, the national security team was chosen with care, and I think the new vigor in foreign policy, notwithstanding these setbacks, I think is working to a plan. For instance, the outreach to what we call West Asia, others called Middle East, I think is a well thought out and a deliberate strategy, because they may have problems between themselves, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Iran and Israel, but we are going out there and trying to establish a relationship with each of those countries and making them work. So outreach to UAE, to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to even Iran and to Israel is actually aimed at a larger game plan of probably, I mean I may be wrong completely because there are many more experienced people here, of probably isolating Pakistan in the Muslim world, if you look at the way it has panned out. Initially, of course, Prime Minister Modi extended his hand of friendship to both China and Pakistan, but when it turned out that they were not interested, I think a tougher stand has been taken. No talks policy with Pakistan can be debated, whether it's the right policy or not, but I always wonder, what is a good policy with Pakistan? Is it no talks? Is it ignoring them? Or what has been our good policy? For 70 years, we've not found answer. So probably this is one of the things that has been tried out, that we don't talk to them unless terrorism is going on in Jammu and Kashmir and elsewhere. Other neighbors, I think we've done very well with Bangladesh. We've done well with Nepal in spurts. But now, is it a setback really? I mean, that's something that again we have to ponder, because the Madeshis, who form 37% of Nepal's population, remain firmly in India's camp. And in the long run, I think that should not be discounted. We might have Oli and Prachand coming together. We might have a pro-China government in Nepal. But is it going to last long enough? Is there political stability? Let us look at that. I mean, not just get, I think, I said this yesterday, I think, on Twitter, but I know Twitter is too trivial, but I think that line that I used, I think is apt, that we believe in pralay, in disaster and apocalypse very easily in our public discourse. So I think it's a long drawn out game. I think we shouldn't be panicking too much about it. So what has changed in these last 3 years? I think let's also acknowledge the fact that China is no longer the China of the old, of Mao or of Deng Xiaoping or even Hu Jintao, where they said, let's hide our strength and bide our time. Today's China under Xi is willing to go out there and assert itself both economically and militarily. That's a reality that we have to face. And therefore, and we are also faced with an unsettled and completely turmoil-ridden Pakistan. So therefore, the challenges have only mounted as compared to what it was, say, a decade ago. The hesitation of history should not bind us. And I think Prime Minister Modi is one person who's willing to take risks when some of the risks have paid off, some have not. But that's the way I think foreign policy or even national security policy does make its way forward. The basis of the current policy is India first. We no longer have the desire to be the good boys in the global order. So if we are friendly with Israel, we are also reaching out to Palestine. If we are friendly with Saudi Arabia, we are also reaching out to Iran. And therefore, I think this old notion of to be liked by everyone in the global order, having just been vanished or banished, we are, I think, playing hardball with China, as demonstrated in Dolam itself. Move to isolate Pakistan, I have already mentioned. The point is, we were the only country who refused to join the Belt and Road Initiative. And today, I was looking at the statement from the German foreign minister at the Munich conference day before yesterday, and they have started talking, the Europeans have started talking the Indian language of the debt trap that is there in the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese way of trying to change the long-held norms of business, long-held norms of foreign policy. All these attempts to change the old norms are being now resisted. And I think India has played a leading role there in trying to inject that kind of a thought across the world, standing firm in opposition to the Belt and Road Initiative, saying that it is a new kind of colonialism, a new kind of taking over countries through debt traps. I think that should be looked at with much more closer scrutiny, and one must accept that it's been not very easy to stand firm against China, both in the Belt and Road Initiative and at Dolam. And let's not forget that China does not forgive and forget easily. So we will have pinpricks, we will have trouble brewing from land to ocean. But I think the reorientation of the Indian security establishment and also the use of India's geographical location as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, whole peninsula, is being now looked at in a much definite way. Strengthening the Navy is, I think, a priority. Making a bold move to make India a legitimate nuclear power is also, I think, something that through memberships of NSG, so trying to get the membership of NSG, but Wassenaar Agreement, the Australia Group, I think these are building blocks to something that we are looking at as we are going forward. Just a word about what we lack in India is a public discourse which is well informed, which is based on facts rather than emotions. One example of day before yesterday, when a Chinese website put out a news that a surface action group of the Chinese Navy is come to the East Indian Ocean, and everybody went berserk until it was sort of put out, or it was brought out by somebody, that actually they had come to the Straits of Sunda and they were turning east and going back through the Straits of Lombok, and which they've been doing for some time now, for 6-8 months now. So to fall for that perception, and I think the Chinese are very good at it, because they have a huge reach through Xinhua and through CGTN and others, and the Australian media actually lapped it up. And we also look at the Chinese propaganda and start panicking. Actually, India has a great surveillance capability both on the western edge of Malacca and in the Indian Ocean. I think we should not be underestimating our own strength in the Indian Ocean and our primacy in the Indian Ocean, although the Chinese would like to say that Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. But I think the new contest is on there, and we have to be aware, we have to be proactive. And I think one good thing that is happening in this government, whether success rate is good or not, but at least there are attempts to limit the Chinese presence in various ways. If they have built Gwadar, we have Chabahar. If they have Djibouti, we have gone to Seychelles and Mauritius and now negotiating with the French for the Reunion Island lease. So there are ways of doing it, and I think we will see how it goes in the next 4 or 5 years. But I think I'm confident that this government is on the right path. Whether it will get the right results or not is something that we'll have to wait and watch. On that note, I think I'll stop. Thank you.